This is Steve Trifletti, and welcome to this edition of Plymouth Profiles. Plymouth Profiles is an opportunity to meet with people from the greater Plymouth area who are having a direct effect on our lives in the greater Plymouth community. And I'm delighted today to welcome Judith Kirkendall. Welcome, Judith.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And Judith is with the Seven Hills Behavioral Health. And Judith, tell us a little bit about your background and how you happen to get involved in being at Seven Hills Behavioral Health.
Well, my background is I've been with the Massachusetts Tobacco Cessation Program for 20 years. Prior to that, I was in hospital human resources, go figure. But I moved on because tobacco is a very big issue in my life. I lost both my parents to tobacco. And I've always felt that it was criminal what the tobacco industry does to people and their health and their well-being. So I got involved 20 years ago. I have a master's in health services management, but you don't have to have a degree like that to get into the work that I do. We are funded by the Massachusetts Tobacco and Cessation Program, which is a part of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. And this money comes out of the tobacco taxes and the tobacco settlement money. And so 20 years ago was the first referendum, you might remember it, when the voters said they wanted a 25-cent tax on tobacco that would be used for prevention and for treatment and to help smokers quit. And for a long time we were getting a very, very nice share of that money, but as time went on it got smaller and smaller. And then there was the tobacco settlement money, and that was a lot of money that comes in every year, paid for by the tobacco industry, theoretically to go for medical treatment and for prevention. But over time, that money has been spent on the general fund. So at this point, the tobacco taxes and the tobacco settlement money equals about $1 billion a year in Massachusetts. And the Massachusetts Tobacco Cessation Program receives 0.5% of that.
It's interesting how you say you came about this, because over the years we talked earlier when I was involved in the Plymouth School Committee in the 80s, pushing through no smoking in schools before the state law passed, and when I was in town meeting pushing through no smoking in restaurants before there was a state law. I was in part motivated by my parents, particularly my father, who never smoked a day in his life, but died of emphysema because he was exposed in his workplace to a lot of things like asbestos and polyvinyl chloride piping and so on, but a lot of things that weren't healthy. And I recall in the last years of his life that in those days most restaurants and public places were not smoke-free, and even at my brother's wedding we had failed to make the decision to have it smoke-free. We hadn't really thought about it, and within a few minutes after the reception began, my father had to leave.
Oh boy. And
he wasn't able to even enjoy his son's wedding reception because of the smoking. And because in those days, he died in 1984, and so it probably was the early 80s, and it was just at a time when that wasn't happening. And so we've come such a long way since then. We have come a long way,
and I'm happy to have been a part of it, of making the policy move to the point where 10 years ago we passed the Massachusetts Smoke-Free Workplace Law, which has been a tremendous success. We thought, how is this ever going to be enforced? It's any place that there's one or more employees. It was self-enforcing. Because if you think about it, in this state there's a 16% smoking rate. So that's 84% of the people don't smoke. So if you're in the workplace and you know that there's a state law and somebody's smoking in the desk next to you or in the cubicle next to you or somewhere in the office, you're going to complain.
Sure.
And then it's up to the Human Resource Office to deal with that, or the employer to deal with that. So it's gone swimmingly well. We're really, really excited about that, and we saw the smoking rate plummet.
Now, you talked about your revenue source being based on the amount of cigarettes as well as the settlement. So if the percentage has gone down, are you seeing an increase in the revenue each year from maybe the cost of cigarettes or added tax?
If you're talking about healthcare costs?
Yes.
Oh yes, healthcare costs are just amazing. I think that just what they can calculate, smokers alone, never mind the secondhand smoke, It's 10% of our annual healthcare budget, and I can't even tell you how many billions of dollars that is. But it is a lot of money that we could be saving. And they can't capture all the secondhand smoke problems and how many people come to the ER because they have COPD, and they get sick and they're in that ER all the time because of secondhand smoke. So we can't capture all of that. We do know that secondhand smoke causes stroke now and a heart attack. That is the new Surgeon General's report, just came out about 6 months ago, and there is no safe level of exposure to secondhand smoke. That is the Surgeon General's report. It is a Class A human carcinogen. That means it causes cancer in humans, not just lab rats or other animals and studies. It definitely causes cancer in humans. So it's in the same category with asbestos. And you and I both know we would not work or live anywhere where we were exposed to asbestos, especially after what happened to your father.
Right. So, and what I was trying to, I guess, get at with that early question was, has the amount of money that comes in from the referendum and the law, has that increased over the years?
Oh, very much so.
And why is
yes,
that?
because every couple of years you'll see another 25-cent tax has been added on to the tobacco, to the point now where cigarettes like your Marlboros or your Newports, they're between $9 and $10 a pack. If you're a pack-a-day smoker, you could be spending as much as 30 times 4, $120 a month after tax income on smoking. Now, a lot of people, because they're so addicted, and nicotine is the most addictive substance we know, that they will give up eating. They will give up their medications. They might not be able to pay for their rent, but they will find a way to pay for those cigarettes because it's such a serious addiction.
And is that not covered by some relief that people receive, such as food stamps or other types of support? I mean, is it excluded, or can people buy cigarettes with the money that they receive from the state?
No, I see what you're getting at. Yes. No, if you have food stamps, or known as EBT card,
yes,
then that will swipe. It will not buy cigarettes. It will not buy liquor. So you can't use that money for that. So if you're buying your cigarettes, you're buying them with cash, and it's your hard-earned cash. And you can't use the EBT card or your fuel supplement or your housing supplement for that. So it especially affects low-income people in a very bitter way. And so we try to help people quit smoking. We have a 1-800-QUIT-NOW number, and we recommend that people call there because we have tobacco treatment specialists on the line in Spanish and English, and they will provide counseling every week by schedule over the phone. We also have some local programs. Jordan Hospital has a program. Betty Antonellis is great. She's been doing it for 20 years. You can call Jordan and sign up for a group. Not all communities have that, but we're very lucky that Jordan, which is now known as the Deaconess Beth, I think it's Deaconess Beth Israel now.
Beth Israel Deaconess,
yes,
at Plymouth.
At Plymouth.
BID at Plymouth.
BID at Plymouth.
And so, Judith, how do you help people from themselves? In other words, I recall when I was pushing through the local legislation for smoke-free schools, smoke-free restaurants, and the people who were very vigorously opposing it, I had one woman later come up to me. Her sister had been, she had been a town meeting member. She worked against these proposals, and her sister had been on the school committee after me, and then contracted lung cancer and died fairly quickly. And she came to me in tears, apologizing for having worked so hard against it, and basically saying that it was the right thing to do, and she wished it had been done earlier, and maybe her sister wouldn't have gone so quickly. And I thought to myself, I knew at the time that it was the right thing to do, but for people who are using cigarettes or family members around cigarettes, what can be done to try to, as I say, help them from themselves, from their lack of understanding or their refusal to acknowledge and accept what's going on? I have another dear friend who got lung cancer and COPD, and he's very limited now as to, even walking upstairs. He has to pause, and it's just from years and years of smoking. He says, well, I started smoking at 14, and that's what my parents did, and that's all I knew. I mean, that's his his explanation for it.
That's the saddest story of all,
Right.
and it is the truth. When I work with smokers and I say, please raise your hand if you started smoking under the age of 16, everybody does. Almost everybody does. And whose fault is that? That's the tobacco industry. They have been marketing to kids since the beginning of time. And that's why we work so hard to have Board of Health regulations that prohibit the sale of tobacco products to people under 18, and then we, with the little bit of money that we get, we try to do compliance checks and make sure those vendors aren't selling to kids. But they are. They are. We can't catch them all the time. We're like the state police with both hands tied behind our backs. We're not out there all the time, and the vendors know it. So we work very hard to educate the public about the dangers, about how important it is that kids don't start. We did so well the past 20 years. We saw the smoking rate go down for our teens, for our young teens. We were thrilled. But there's something new that's come out that the tobacco industry had been planning all along, and it's called an e-cigarette. Electronic cigarette.
So tell us a little bit about the e-cigarettes.
Well, you know, the Department of Public Health really wasn't worried about it. We thought that it was just going to be smokers using it. And so when it first came out, it was like $80 for one, and you'd see them in kiosks in the mall, and then it was $60, and then it was $40, and then all of a sudden it came down to about $10 for an e-cigarette. And everything changed. And we saw the kids buying it in droves. They're flavored. Want to hear some of the flavors?
Go ahead.
Bazooka bubblegum, sweet tarts. They actually use the actual names of the candy. And when you smell this thing, believe me, it is the closest thing to bazooka bubblegum you can find. So they have marketed these with terrifically wonderful flavors, packaging that looks like candy, looks like fruit roll-ups when you're buying it, or it looks like Skittles when you're buying it. It's that same thing. You can't tell, the parents can't, they could look in the backpack, they can't tell the difference between Skittles and one of these products. So it's been marketed to our kids, and our kids think it's great. First of all, kids like electronic anything, right? Secondly, the kids can buy it because all of the boards of health that passed regulations around tobacco, it's illegal to sell tobacco products to those under 18, right?
Right.
E-cigarettes are not tobacco. They are nicotine delivery devices. So now we have to go back to all the boards of health individually
and change it.
And change the regulations, which we're doing ever so
why
slowly.
Why can't you do that under state law?
There is a bill at the State House. It doesn't seem to be moving.
Okay.
You know that. You know how long it takes for the state to do it.
They
so
often follow many of the communities, as in the case of the smoking.
You were there for the smoke-free restaurant and band. We had to have a very large number of local communities that passed those regs before the state legislature would make the move. Right. So that's where we are. So, you know, it's quite legal for the vendor right now to sell e-cigarettes to kids, and they do. And so we're very, very concerned about that. And also the nicotine, the kids believe because it's not a cigarette, they'll tell you it's healthy. Never realizing there are all kinds of chemicals in there, and we don't know what they are because they're made by manufacturers in China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, all kinds of places coming into this country. Some of them have been analyzed, but we don't have the money to analyze them all. Some of them have like the same things that antifreeze have in them.
Do you have the text for proposed legislation to include in town bylaws or ordinances?
The sample regulations are out there, and boards of health are considering them, and many have passed them. Many have passed them. We have the sample language, which comes from the Mass Municipal Association and the Mass Association of Health Boards. They have drafted the sample regs.
And do you happen to know if Plymouth has adopted this?
Not yet.
Okay.
They've seen them,
all right,
but they haven't done it yet.
And does it need to be adopted by the Board of Health, or would it be adopted in some cases by town meeting?
Usually Board of Health, because they're going to be the enforcers.
Okay.
And that is the way we've always done tobacco regulations, because as you probably know, the boards of health have more power because of our home rule here in the Commonwealth. They have more power than any other boards in the local landscape. So they can enforce these regulations, and they have for years. They've been fining tobacco vendors who sell to youth for years. They require a tobacco permit, just like a food permit or a milk permit. So the boards of health are the ones that are really in charge. But it's slow. We have to get to all of them. I alone work for 59 towns. southeastern Mass, the Cape and the Islands. So, but we are working and we are moving forward. I can tell you the towns that have done it off the top of my head are Taunton and New Bedford and Fall River and Fairhaven and Dartmouth and Wareham, just to name a few.
What would be a reason not to adopt it? I mean, I'm just wondering why Plymouth, for example, has not adopted that yet.
I think they're considering it. I really do.
Is there any, I mean, what would be the arguments? I can't think of any arguments to not adopt it, particularly if you already got non-smoking in the workplace and schools and restaurants. Right. And
I can't think of a reason not to, because the way the regulation is written is that, and you can pick the different sections out. You know, it's a sample menu. Do you want to make sure that e-cigarettes can't be used anywhere where the workplace law applies? 50% of the boards that have passed it have put that in there.
Right.
They don't have to, but they have. Right. That e-cigarettes have to be sold to those 18 and over. That anybody selling e-cigarettes has to have a permit. They have to pay for a permit. They have to treat it like a tobacco product. It can't be on the front of the counter. It has to be behind the counter like all of our cigarette products are. And our chew tobacco's back there and our pipe tobacco's back there. They also, one of the things on the menu is a ban on the sale of tobacco products in pharmacies. That's been adopted in, I think at least 80 towns. And the reason is that they define them as healthcare institutions, which they are. Lately, when you go into CVS or a Rite Aid or Walgreens, you're going to get your blood pressure checked, you might get your diabetes checked, you might have somebody there counseling you. Well, the pharmacist always counsels you on how to use the medication. So they're considered healthcare institutions, and most towns are moving forward on that as well. And the youth feel very, very strong about that. The youth feel, you know how young people are very big about justice and right and wrong? It's very black and white with them. Yeah. They don't understand why you're walking into one place to get the medication that helps you makes you better, and at the same time they're selling something that makes people sick and die.
They see those inconsistencies.
Yeah, and then they're selling the product to help you deal with the nicotine, which is the nicotine patches and the gum and the Shantex. So the kids see that right away. They go, this makes no sense at all to them.
Right.
And so that's been relatively easy. So, you know, the e-cigarettes...
So there's hope in the future, because the kids never grew up as we did, certainly, at a time when I was growing up where there was smoking everywhere.
Right. Absolutely everywhere.
So we kind of, over the years, it's evolved, but, you know...
Social norms are changing, but very slowly.
And so many of us maybe don't feel as strongly. I mean, you and I do, because of personal experiences, among other reasons, but there are some people who, even if they choose not to smoke, and even if their family doesn't, they may not fully appreciate that there's a compelling public policy or state policy reason for having it, and they may just say, well, it's an individual right, and I'm not going to, you know, prevent people from their right to do it. But we know that in this case, there's an overriding public policy reading, and you comment about health care and the cost of health care. Or in the workplace, the adverse, we talked earlier off camera, when I was in high school, college, and law school, and I was working at restaurants, I would come home, take off my clothes, throw them in the wash machine, and take a shower, just to get all the smoke out of my hair and off my body. That's
one of the reasons that the smoke-free workplace law was passed with that name on it. Right. Because if you're a bartender or a wait staff person, 40 hours or more,
absolutely,
you are exposed, and we now know that it causes cancer, heart attack, and stroke. So that is that's a workplace issue. It's like an OSHA issue. And your clothes were off-gassing, which is now we know third-hand smoke, because the fabrics...
What's the difference? Oh, so it's called off-gassing?
Yes. When you've got third-hand smoke, it's in the fabric.
Right.
It's in the carpet. It's in the upholstery. It's in your car. If you're smoking in your car, it's in your upholstery and in that fabric that's all around the inside interior roof of your car.
Yes.
That is impossible to get out. We all know that if you smoke in your car, the value of your car just went way down. Right. And also that if you wanted to rent a car, well, you're not going to be able to rent that car.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, there are wonderful stories about, you know, you rent your non-smoking car and you get there and they're out of them and they only have a smoking car, and you go, well, I can't take it. Well, they have to give you the Mercedes.
Yeah.
So remember that.
Yeah. I didn't know they still have smoking cars.
They don't, but if people break the rules and you get in that car and you smell it, they're going to have to offer you something.
Right.
And in Europe especially,
Yeah.
they will upgrade you. But housing, the same thing. I mean, if you live in an apartment where you've been smoking for years and years and years, then it's time to turn that apartment over. Landlords and housing authorities know this. They're going to spend 2 to 3 more times what they would normally spend to get it ready. And it has to be taken off the rental market until it's all done. They're going to rip out the carpet. They're going to take down the drapes. If there's that soft ceiling stuff, they're going to take it out. They're going to have to replace, in some cases, the appliances in the kitchen. It's very bad.
So you even have probably statistics showing that it's economically cheaper to have no smoking because of all these added hidden costs, if you will.
Exactly. And not only that, if your market rate, meaning let's not say that you're a housing authority, which many housing authorities are going smoke-free, but if you are a market rate apartment, you know that if, let's say, 80% of the population does not smoke and 20% does, you're going to be far better off making your house or apartment smoke-free. And you see it in the newspaper all the time. Smoke-free apartment, smoke-free house, smoke-free. Because they know that there are so many people that if they walk in to look at a house or an apartment to rent and they smell smoke, it's off the list. They're not going to rent it. So landlords are very savvy about this. Very, very savvy. They understand. You know, would you be marketing to 20% of the population, or would you be marketing to 80% of the population?
Well, we were talking earlier, when I moved into my current office building back in the late 80s, again was a time when not many people had smoke-free commercial space. And I found, I did it not for economic reasons, but because of my own personal reasons. I didn't want to be in a building with smoke. And yet my tenant, the largest tenant that I had other than my office, was a national insurance company who only could move into an entire smoke-free building, and there weren't that many in Plymouth.
There weren't that many anywhere back in the 80s.
Because, you know, unless you were a new building and unless you were making the whole building, it was hard to find a place where you could move where there weren't already grandfathered in other tenants that had the smoking. So that was good for me economically, and that tenant is still with me today in 2014, since 1989. So we've been together for a long time, and it's been a very good business marriage, but it started in great part because we had a no smoking space available for them that they needed at the time when they were moving.
Right, right. Which you were way ahead of your time. Because we all remember working, you owned your building, but most of us worked in smoking environments. I mean, even in hospitals, we had ashtrays on the nursing units. We did. And it wasn't that long ago, 1986, 1987, still smoking in hospitals. That's all gone away.
I'm also smiling because I served on the board at the local hospital for many years and made several proposals to have the hospital smoke-free, not only in the building but on the grounds. And it took until I left a few years ago, and it was only after I left that was finally passed. And it was always difficult for me to understand how a hospital, a place that promotes wellness, could allow it on the grounds when we don't allow it on the grounds at schools, and where there are some places, you know, certainly up in Boston, when I've been to some of the Boston hospitals, they're actually, you know, signs and indicators as to how far away from the building you have to be before you can be smoking.
Again, you were ahead of the game, because we have been working with hospitals very closely over the last 5 years. And they, I think almost to every one of them, they now have smoke-free campuses. But that's relatively new, and that took a long time to get us there.
Why did it take so long?
Well, because, let's be honest, it's not just the patients that are smokers. It's the staff.
And that's what would happen. And I found that to be, when I was on the board of the hospital, difficult to embrace, to be walking out of the facility and seeing staff right outside the door. I mean, you couldn't avoid walking through the smoking gauntlet of smokers. I mean, it just seemed to be so inconsistent.
It's very inconsistent, but it's the fact of the nicotine addiction. You know, I don't know if you were a smoker. I was.
Never.
It's a very strong addiction. Nicotine, if it didn't kill you, would be a great drug. I always say that. If it didn't kill you, it would be a great drug. It gives you what you want. Unlike other drugs like cocaine or alcohol, it impairs your ability to think or drive a car, or maybe makes you act in a different way than you normally would. Nicotine doesn't do that. If you are nervous, it calms you down. If you're sleepy, it wakes you up. It goes to the brain. It goes directly to the brain through the dopamine and the serotonin, and it gives you what you want. Now that is a tough addiction to break. And because it's legal, and because we all saw it for all these years, it's been a very difficult social norm to break. But we're getting there. We understand. Our goal is that every smoker should have the opportunity to quit, and quit successfully, because 70% of smokers that we survey in the state and have done this consistently, they want to quit, and they've tried a couple times this year. They keep trying. They do. But it is a difficult nut to crack.
When you say it's a difficult social norm to break, I don't know what you mean by social norm, but I know if I were to encounter someone who was smoking, I would not allow myself to remain in their presence.
Exactly.
I would remove myself.
Right. But the smokers who are still smoking are with one another. It's created another culture. If I'm smoking, I'm going to find other smokers to be my friends. And that's one of the things we talk about when we help people change behavior when they're quitting smoking and they're going through a process, and it is a process, is you may have to stay away from your smoking friends for a while. It's like when you give up drinking, you can't go to the bar. You can't go with your drinking friends. You just have to make new friends for now. You might, down the line, when you're out of danger, and you're out of the danger of, relapsing, which is a relapse, then you just have to stay away from it. My husband quit smoking. He was a 3-pack-a-day guy.
Wow.
And when he quit smoking, he said, I will never touch them again. So if you were to ask him to hold your cigarettes, or you were to ask him to light it, he would not do it, because he's still 30 years later, afraid of it.
Right.
That's how strong the addiction is. Right. It's really tough.
And it is strong, because I was also at an after hours probably a couple months ago, after the close of business at a local restaurant, sipping my Diet Coke, which I know the diet's not good for me, but I walked out after talking with some people, and there were a couple of people who would have been in attendance out on the street in the middle of winter in the cold, huddled, smoking, and one of them said, "Oh, Steve," she said, "I didn't want you to see me smoking." She said, "I'm so embarrassed." And it was interesting, because I don't know that I've ever had a conversation with her about it, but she obviously knew that, it wasn't good for her, that I probably wouldn't embrace that as something that I would think was okay. And yet she couldn't help herself.
That's right. That's exactly right. And we have a lot of smokers who smoke in secret. We call them closet smokers.
I was going to say closet smokers.
We do, and we know about them, and they will come to a group and they will tell us, but they don't want to tell the people at work, or they don't want to tell some of them don't even, their kids don't know. It amazes me. They brush their teeth constantly. They have them hidden outside in the yard somewhere. It is a big thing to be a closet smoker, because they know it's bad for their health. They don't want their children to know. They don't want their employer to know. It's very difficult. And so we're really trying to help those smokers. It's not easy. But when people quit, they do. If you go on makesmokinghistory.org, which is our website, www.makesmokinghistory.org. You go on to, there's quitting, there's secondhand smoke, and there's youth. There's many categories. But the first thing you come on is quitting. And we have our ex-smoker Hall of Fame. And there are videos of people that tell their story. What it was like to be a smoker, what brought them to the point where they could actually quit, how they quit, and what's life like now. And what's life like now is the big one. Oh my goodness, it just changes your whole life for the better.
I think it's naive for many of them to think that they can hide it from people close around. I know at my office, we meet with our clients in a conference room. They're not large. And many times, including several people in the past year, if I'm comfortable, and I'm really comfortable with most of my clients, to say something, if somebody walks in and they've obviously been smoking and they hadn't disclosed to me they were smokers, I've said something like, "Oh, you've smoked, you're smoking, and we just have a conversation about it. And I think in a few cases they're surprised, like, how would I know? Well, we're in a small room together. I can smell it on you. I can, there's a smell that you can't hide, regardless of the gum or the gargle or the
how many
drops.
times you take a shower a day. Some people do that. Well, I will tell you that when smokers quit, they become even more sensitive to smelling it, either on people or in the world.
It's harder for them. My friend who's got lung cancer, now it's very hard for him to be around smokers because he knows he can't breathe well, and it's as much as he smoked, now he's just
right. And they're so astonished when they quit smoking that did I smell like that? How would you know that you did? Because when you're smoking, the alveoli, the little hairs in your lungs, which are your sweepers that you and I all know we can cough and sneeze and get things out of our lungs, those get matted down by the tar and the nicotine. They can't smell anymore. So when they quit smoking, sometimes they cough up a lot of unpleasant things, but it's cleaning, and then when they quit smoking, they go, oh my gosh, I never smelled the barbecue before. I never smelled those flowers before. It's like a whole new world because they couldn't smell. Their sense of smell was pretty much nil.
Right.
And now they smell other smokers and they're horrified and they're embarrassed. They're like, did I really? Yeah, you did. You did. I did.
So let's try. We've heard a lot about secondhand smoke, people who are around other smokers. So is there much in the way of medical studies or data now on third-hand smoke?
It's coming out, and it's just as bad. Like with pediatricians, they're very strong about it. Pediatricians will say, well, if you smoke, have a jacket on a hook outside the house. Go outside, smoke if you have to. Take that jacket off and come back in the house. Don't pick that baby up and put it next to your clothing if you've been smoking, because what's the baby's face goes? Right here. And children are very susceptible. They have a lot of, when you see the kids with the ear infections and the bronchitises and the pneumonias, a lot of times it's a smoking household. So we worry a lot about children. We worry a lot about seniors. Seniors are exposed. A lot of the housing authorities have gone smoke-free and are continuing to go. They go, as you know, municipal housing authorities are separate individual entities in each community, so that we have to go to them, just like we go to the boards of health locally, and educate them and educate their residents. We survey the residents. We find out what's going on. Do they want a smoke-free policy? Don't they? By and large, when you're talking about a survey in apartments, we call it multi-unit housing, then it's 70%, almost always. 70% or higher will say, I want a smoke-free apartment. So then when we're educating the residents about that, the residents will say, well, you're just picking on low-income people because, here we are, a municipal housing authority. We can't afford to go out and go elsewhere. We're here and we're smokers and we want our right to smoke. And I said, you know what? I felt that way too for a long, long time. And then I had to start turning my head around to a little degree and think, now wait a minute. If 70% of the people who live in housing don't smoke, and that I'm giving it a higher one because sometimes in housing there's a higher smoke rate. So let's say, just for argument's sake, 30% of them smoke, 3 out of 10. 7 to 10 don't. They want a smoke-free apartment. But guess what? They can't afford it. They can't open the newspaper and pick the non-smoking apartment or the non-smoking house or whatever is available on Craigslist. They can't afford it. So they are forced, because they need subsidized housing, they are forced to live in a smoking environment. That kind of turned my head around a little bit. When we first started talking about it, I said, oh, you're right. And they will call, people in housing, they'll call and say, I need to be protected. I'm sick. I've got COPD. I've been going to the hospital for breathing treatments because of where I live, because I don't have clean air to breathe. So that's a very big issue. We know now that secondhand smoke causes heart attack and stroke. We didn't know that before, Steve. We did not know that. We know it now.
So I want to ask you about housing, but first I just want to go back briefly to the pediatrician and the smoker's jacket. So for people who are watching who think, well, it's okay as long as they don't smoke around my child, what you're really saying is, because when my children were young many years ago, my mother-in-law, God rest her soul, would smoke, and we would ask her to smoke outside, but probably the second part of that would have been, leave your jacket outside. Wear a jacket, leave it outside, so when you come back in and hold the children, they're not getting the, what do you call it, the gassing?
It's off-gassing.
Off-gassing.
Off-gassing. It's all those carcinogens that are just off-gassing. You know, when you think about it, when you do a big bonfire out in the yard or something like that, and you sit around it and all your clothes and your hair and everything starts smelling like the bonfire, well, that's exactly what it is. You're igniting something. It's combustible. Speaking of combustible, one of the other big issues about smoke-free housing is fire.
Okay.
I can tell you the Plymouth Fire Department is very concerned about that. You know, especially on oxygen. Very scary. We had a case in Plymouth a few years ago where the individual turned off their oxygen, thought they were doing the right thing, turned off the oxygen, lit the cigarette, but forgetting that the oxygen's still in the tube. It's still there. So, there's pictures of it going just along the tube and right up the wall.
My daughter actually bought a house that had an accident for that house in Plymouth on South Meadow Road, but the story was that there had been an oxygen tank, there had been a fire, and the place is new now because the place was gutted after the terrible tragedy.
Terrible. Did the person
I don't think so.
Away? Okay. Hope they didn't pass away.
Yeah, I don't.
But you know, even a spark will set off oxygen. Right. And the thing is, when you're using oxygen, you've got a lot more oxygen in your body. So it will, you know, you'll burn faster. Oh, it's an awful thought.
No.
Terrible thought.
So going back to the housing and these rules, how do tenants who come to these housing complexes that say they're smoke-free, how do they protect themselves or enforce the no smoking if there are people violating the policy within the housing complex?
Well, at this point, we are working with enforcement issues. As you probably know, Boston, all of Boston, housing, 12,000 units, 27,000 people have gone smoke-free. New Bedford's gone smoke-free. Worcester, lots of smaller towns like Taunton and Fairhaven and Dartmouth, all gone smoke-free. Lots on the Cape. But enforcement is an issue. And the housing authority managers who do have the policy to work with, they work very hard with, it's just like anything else. It's in your lease. You signed a lease, it's smoke-free, you're breaking the lease. So you have to, you know, go through progressive discipline and then maybe go to the clerk magistrate, and the clerk magistrate has to deal with it. But it's a long, long deal. Some housing authorities have actually charged fines. Yeah. That seems to be working better.
Right.
But we can't tell you because it's all new. Right. You know, we need more longitudinal studies to find out if that's really going to work. But fines seem to bother people more than, you know, fear of the manager's going to talk to me.
And do you find in these housing authorities that landlords will evict tenants who are violating the no smoking?
Yes, they will. It takes a while, but they'll do it. The other thing that sometimes happens is at the very end, if somebody is like breaking the policy over and over and over again, they'll finally say, I want to move. And they'll try to find them a transfer elsewhere, somewhere where they can go. It might not be a housing authority, but it might be a subsidized apartment somewhere. But I will tell you, most subsidized elderly and disabled properties that are managed by Corcoran, Peabody, Hall-Keene, all the big companies, they're all going smoke-free too. So the choices for the smoker are getting smaller and smaller, which is another reason we need to help the smoker deal with that. Because when we do smoke-free housing, we never say that smokers aren't welcome to live there. Smokers have every right to live there. All they have to do is smoke outside.
But it sounds like if they smoke outside, but they don't use the precautions that you've said with the smoker's jacket, then they still bring it back in.
They're bringing it back into their apartment, which is okay, because, you know, we don't think that secondhand smoke, off-gassing off your clothes, travels to the next apartment. However, active smoke, when the person's actively smoking or the cigarette is in the ashtray burning, that travels, and it travels everywhere in any multi-unit housing because of the regulations. When you build an apartment or a big complex, air has to move. If air doesn't move, it's not a safe place to live. You've got to have air circulation. So there's no way to stop air circulation. The American Society of Heating and Air Conditioning and Refrigeration, the American standard for all buildings, they have looked at every possible way to screen secondhand smoke, and they can't, and they say it's impossible. So you just have to not allow it because the smoke's going to travel. It's like chlorinating half the pool. You can't chlorinate half the pool. Right. The water moves, the air moves.
So what is Seven Hills Behavioral Health?
We are actually one of the largest health and human service agencies in the state, including we're in Rhode Island as well. We do everything from substance abuse which of course tobacco is one, substance abuse, HIV counseling, mental health counseling. We have many, many residences for adults with developmental disabilities. That's our big part of our business. We have methadone clinics. We have one in New Bedford. We have parent visitation programs. We have Educational Opportunity Center, which is helping young people get financial aid. We have talent search, and we have so many programs that go into the high schools and help kids who might not think about college maybe find their way into a college with help and tutoring and education. So you name it, we do it.
And so this is one of your many programs?
Yes, this tobacco program is just one of the many programs, the Seven Hills Behavioral Health.
Now, what does it mean to be a Class A carcinogen?
Good question. There are many, many carcinogens. As you remember, the saccharin scare.
Yes.
I don't know how many of the viewers are old enough to remember, but we were told that saccharin was going to cause cancer, and then they found out that you would have to drink like 5 cases of Coke a day, or of Diet Coke a day, to get cancer. They realized that. So they said, okay, that was lab animals. That was not people. Now we know the truth of the matter is that it's not saccharin, but it is definitely tobacco smoke, whether it be you smoking or you breathing secondhand smoke, is a Class A carcinogen, meaning it causes cancer in the humans, absolutely. And it's not just lung cancer. Everybody raises their hand. It's lung cancer. I go, just one of many. We now know it's associated with every cancer: pancreatic, ovarian, prostate, liver, you name it. And when you think about it, it only makes sense. If you're getting a certain kind of cancer from smoking or secondhand smoke, your blood moves through your body. Everything's moving around. Those carcinogens are everywhere. So we're very concerned about that, because most people think, well, it'll take me forever to get lung cancer, so I won't worry about it. You should worry about it. You should really worry about it. Plenty of young people have cancers. Plenty of young people get COPD, which I think is an awful disease.
Right.
I mean, when you can't breathe, it's pretty bad.
Scary.
It's very scary. It's terrifying, actually. And the heart attack and stroke thing, I cannot stress enough. Heart attack and stroke is the #1 cause of disease and death with smokers and secondhand smoke. It's going to happen much sooner than a cancer is going to develop. So we know, for example, when we passed the smoke-free worksite law in Fall River, this is an example. Fall River had no restaurant or bar regulations prior to, like Plymouth did, like most of your Southeast Mass towns did. No. You wanted to smoke, you went to Fall River, and you smoked in every bar, hairdresser, barbershop, office, you smoked everywhere. So we said, why don't we look at the rate of heart attack and stroke at the 2 city hospitals, St. Anne's and Charlton. So we worked with the hospitals, they looked up their DRGs, and they just looked at ER, the emergency room. How many heart attacks and strokes came in the year before, 12 months, and 12 months after? It was amazing. Heart attack and stroke dropped 25%.
Wow.
Nothing else changed in that town. Nothing else changed, except people weren't exposed to tobacco smoke in the workplace, in restaurants and bars. So it's scary. That means 1 of 4 people that could have had a heart attack and stroke did not. So we really have to be cognizant of when we're exposing ourselves to secondhand smoke. Don't take it lightly. It's not just that you don't like the smell of it, it's that like you could die.
Risk. Right.
Yes.
You could die.
You could die from secondhand smoke.
And so really, and hopefully people understand that for those of us that years ago may have appeared to be militant non-smokers, it's really like other things that you would do. You would exercise, you would try and eat right, you would try and, a lot of other things you would try and do. And so even though you're a non-smoker, you also, as part of your wellness regimen, would choose to stay away from the secondhand smoke.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting when you talk about healthy eating and active living, many people who quit smoking do that. They start really watching their diet and they start exercising like crazy, and their life changes. They love it. They can go out and take a walk. Before, it was too hard to take a walk. They can go up and down stairs and think nothing of it. We had one of our ex-smokers, she's my favorite, she said she wanted to be fit and fabulous at 50. So, and she was a heavy smoker, and she couldn't go hiking with her daughter, which was really bothering her because she was only 50.
Right.
She quit smoking, and not only did she hike up Mount Washington, she joined the crew, and I don't know if you know, in New Bedford they have the big whale boats that you row.
Okay.
She's now a rower, and she walked the marathon, 26 miles.
Good for her.
She's one happy girl.
Yes.
And she said, you know, once you can get that nicotine off your back, you're a happy camper. It's a whole different life. So
some people think there's a kind of a rule or regulation that's a violation of your privacy, of your right to smoke. What do you say to people about that?
Are you talking about if they're smoking in their apartment?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, there's no constitutional right to smoke.
Okay.
That has been determined at the highest level of the court. So that's done. People bring it up to me all the time. There is no constitutional right to smoke. Secondly, there is no medical reason to use it, because many people go to their doctor and say, write me a note and say that I have to smoke because I have some kind of depression, or I'm bipolar, or I'm anxious, something like that. That was brought forth, and they contacted the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, every association there was, and said, is there any clinical reason to use nicotine or tobacco for any condition? There is none. So getting a doctor's note won't help. So the right to breathe air trumps the right to smoke. The right to breathe clean, healthy air trumps the right to smoke. So I often equate it to, if I drink 4 drinks or 3 drinks and I get in the car and I drive and I hurt somebody, that's against the law, right? But if I'm living in an apartment and I'm smoking and my neighbor is going to the ER on a regular basis to treat their COPD, it's the same thing. You're making another person sick, or you're causing the neighbor up above you to have a stroke. That's my responsibility as a smoker, not to do that.
So in some of these smoke-free housing, does it make any sense to have a designated area?
Not indoors, because smoke travels. Most of the properties are going smoke-free campus-wide. Some are coming up with one designated area away from the building so that when you open your windows in the summer, the smoke doesn't backdraft into your apartment. Or, like you said, at the hospital, so you can come in and out of the door without going through the smoking blanket.
What's the perimeter that should be?
Well, in public buildings, different regulations, different towns, they'll say 25 to 50 feet from any entrance or exit. But smoke-free housing, municipal, they're usually saying nowhere on the property except and most of them aren't even doing a designated smoking area, but some of them are. It's up to that housing authority. It's up to each housing authority how they want to do it. They have their own board of directors.
So years ago, when you'd go to airports and there'd be this little area where people could go and smoke, not a good idea.
No. But I was in North Carolina recently, and you know, Massachusetts is way ahead.
Right.
So I'm walking through the airport, and I see this glass room, and everybody's in there smoking, and it is like fog. It looks like San Francisco in there, and I thought, oh my gosh, they're in there. They're in a gas chamber in there. It's shocking to see, because Massachusetts has come so far.
Sure.
We wouldn't, you know, or to see a restaurant when you travel by car down south and you go into Kentucky Fried Chicken, and there are babies in high chairs and seniors in wheelchairs, and the place is, you know, it's foggy from smoke. You think, wow, we have come a long way in Massachusetts.
So when you're talking about housing areas and landlords going smoke-free, what are the financial benefits of that for the landlord?
Well, there's a lot of financial benefits in that the turnover won't cost them so much. And if you can't rent the apartment, most housing authorities, by the way, have a waiting list, a long waiting list. So if they can't get somebody in there within 2 weeks to a month, they've lost a month's income. On top of the staff in there cleaning, they have to scrub the walls, then they have to use a product called Kills, then they have to do several layers of paint, and as I said, pull up the carpet, replace the carpet, the drapes, whatever else they have to replace. It's very costly for landlords, and they know it. And even if it's a housing authority, a lot of the people come in and they want a smoke-free apartment, but they can still smell it from the previous, and that's a problem. What are you going to do with that apartment if you can't get that smell out of there?
Got to gut it and redo it. Years ago, probably very early in my career, when I was not in my current location, and I was renting, and I sublet to another lawyer. And when she moved out and took the diplomas off of the wall, there were square marks or rectangle marks from where they had been because she smoked in her office.
Right.
And it was eye-opening for me to see all the damage she caused to that space because of her smoking. And it was like a smoking room. It was like one little room. She didn't smoke in the conference rooms or the receptionist or anywhere else, just in her room, but not good enough.
No, no. When you look at that, you think, oh my gosh, that's going into my body too. You don't want to think about that.
No.
You know, it's very terrifying.
Well, even if she had the window open, there was still the damage
Right.
to that unit. So are there any safe levels of secondhand smoke?
No. That was in the Surgeon General's report. Bold print. There is no safe level of exposure, because people will say, well, if we got a little measurement thing and we put it on the wall and we could measure secondhand smoke, what would be the level of safety? And there is none. It's like saying, what's the safe level of exposure of asbestos? There isn't any. Asbestos is asbestos, and we can't be breathing it.
And how are children affected as compared to adults?
Very seriously. We know, for one thing, SIDS. Do you know what SIDS is?
Yes.
Yes. Some SIDS has been caused by secondhand smoke in the home. Sad.
Yes.
We know that ear infections. We know there's hearing loss, because if you don't get those tubes in those ears early enough, you can have hearing loss, and you're possibly not going to do very well in school. We also know that the children that are brought up in smoking households are more inclined to get lung cancer later in life. It makes sense.
Yep.
And bronchitis and heart problems. So children should not be exposed at any level. And by the way, you're an attorney, and you may have been hearing this, but I've heard it. I don't know if it really happens everywhere. But if there's a custody battle, and one parent smokes in the home and the other doesn't, oftentimes the judge takes that into consideration. So wouldn't it be awful to lose custody because you were still smoking in the home? That would be terrible.
Well, there's no question. I have raised that in the past in cases, so it is a relevant factor. You know, in custody, you have to decide first, are the parents both fit, and then what's in the best interest of the child, and query whether it's in the best interest of the child to be with the smoker or the non-smoker.
All things being equal.
All things being equal.
That might weigh
depending on how
scales
the
of justice.
smoker is handling. In my earlier example of when I was in court and I walked into a room where there were two grandparents of the opposing party, it was like walking into an ashtray, and I thought to myself, if I go back into court, I may seek to get some type of limitation on the grandparent contact with the children because the smoke was so bad.
It'd be so sad. Wouldn't that be sad?
It was third-hand smoke in that case. They weren't wearing smoking jackets as you recommended.
Nope. They were wearing their smoking clothes.
They wore the smoking clothes right in. And that's how it would be, presumably, with the children. So people who are watching this now are maybe wondering, where do I go to get more information? Who do I contact?
Okay, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. And we can have that put up maybe after the show on the screen for people.
Quit Now.
Right, that's our quit line, which is in Boston, and you call there and you get free financial counseling. If you're a member of Mass Health, Medicaid, you get free patches, free gum, free inhaler, and I think depending on your Mass Health membership, you either pay $3 or $5 for a copay for any prescription. You can get the Chantix, you can get the Wellbutrin. So that is a fabulous benefit for people on Mass Health because it's very hard for them to pay for prescriptions. Chantix, by the way, is the new medication that everybody's...
Did it used to be Chantrix or was it always Chantix?
It's Chantix. People probably say Chantrix, but it's Chantix.
Okay.
It interferes with the pleasure pathway to the brain, and you don't have to quit smoking when you start using it, which is really great because if you put the patches on, you think, oh gosh, I got to stop smoking right now. No, you can continue. You'll just get less and less interested. The only thing about Chantix is that some people have had bad side effects. Okay, so that's a small percentage of the population, but nonetheless, you hear the stories and you get all worked up. So you could either get depression or weird dreams or feel funny. The beauty of Chantix, you could stop taking it immediately. Like if you take an antidepressant, you have to wean down. You can stop taking Chantix immediately, and the symptoms will go away. But I've heard more stories from people that Chantix has saved their life.
So Judy, when you're not doing this type of work, what do you do in your spare time?
What do I do in my spare time? Oh, that's a trick question. I ride bikes, and I do Zumba.
Zumba's great.
I love Zumba.
Yeah.
And I'm with my grandchild. That's why it really bothered me thinking about the grandparent that couldn't see the grandchild. That'd be really tough.
It would be. Well, but maybe it's just a question of setting limits for those grandparents as well as parents when they're around the children, so that there's not the exposure to the smoking.
A lot of people on the Ex-Smoker Hall of Fame, they quit because of their grandchildren. When their grandchildren were born, they said, that does it. I'm not smoking around my grandchildren, and I'm not going to even, I don't want them to even smell it on me because I'm a role model.
So for people that just tuned in, maybe halfway through it towards the end, real quick, in 30 seconds, what do you want them to remember and know about your program?
I want them to remember that we're here to help them in any way we can. We're here to help kids not start. We're here to educate everybody about the dangers of secondhand smoke, and we're here, most importantly, to try to help smokers quit. Okay. That's our job.
Judith Kirkendall, thank you so much for being our guest today on Plymouth Profiles, and hopefully you'll be able to help Plymouth pass that ordinance, Board of Health regulation on the e-cigarettes.
Well, that would be great. Yes, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And this completes this edition of Plymouth Profiles. Thank you for joining us, and please join us in the future as we meet with people from the greater Plymouth community affecting our lives. Thank you.